And now we will have real deal R&D in the room. Will, Sergei, Daira-Emma, please join us. And a round of applause. Yeah, bottles aren't necessary evil.
Bring the bottles back to the bar, please, and don't put it on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, respect the house. One mic for this part. Bear with me a second. And here we go. So this panel is centered around R&D, and it's nice rhyme to where we started, because the whole ETH Berlin motto is identity crisis. And here we go, how R&D, cryptography, let's say protocol design, protocol research could solve and tackle this identity crisis. But by hearing Ying Tong, I will start from the different angle, like what kind of adversaries you are, each of you. That, especially from the angle, if you want to solve the, let's say, challenges within the privacy or censorship resistance, you need to think like a sort of adversary. And then how you play with this duality, like sort of Batman Joker type of roles in your work, and what kind of roles you love impersonate in your R&D, let's say, direction. But I forgot to say that Daira-Emma is from Electric Coin Co. Sergei is from Waco/Status. Will is from Filecoin Incentive Labs. Yeah. And really nice people who know what we are talking about. Let's start from Daira-Emma.
Yeah, so repeat the question?
What kind of adversary you are?
Yeah, we should absolutely consider protocol designers to be adversaries. This is important because it is very easy to sweep design problems under the carpet. So you should be skeptical of the claims that people make about their protocols. And I think actually so the cryptography sort of research and design community has a problem in communicating our stuff to end users. Hi. So we need to get better at that, and we also need to foster a culture of skepticism, because, for example, there are a lot of companies promoting things based on trusted execution elements and processes, which are trivially vulnerable to not just the processor design company, but also to state attackers, which can trivially break trusted execution environments, and to any hacker who exploits a mistake in the design. So we should always be skeptical, and I've picked on T's there, but we should be equally skeptical towards the kind of protocols that I design.
I get my mic. Thank you for the question. It was really a little bit unexpected, I would say, because it's not like something that at least I don't maybe think often enough in the frame of mind of an adversary. So we in Waco basically implement a communication layer. So contrary to some other projects out there, contrary to blockchains, we're not of financial nature per se. We may be used by some financial protocols, but not necessarily. But we mostly think in terms of message reliability and message privacy and how to ensure those kinds of things. So I would say that from our perspective, the crucial questions is to think who runs the nodes, and if I were to run some, say, substantial part of Waco nodes, what could I do with that? Like, how can I analyze the messages that pass through me? And even though, again, like as previous speakers on this stage have mentioned already, the metadata is oftentimes even more important than the data itself. So what can I track if I control many vantage points in the network? So this is like one aspect of adversarial thinking that I think might be relevant here. Another one is perhaps the economic incentives and motivations. So we, at least at the moment, we don't have explicit monetary incentives, but research is happening around those lines. So protocols should generally be sustainable, and we shouldn't expect just altruists to be running nodes and to enable like our network functioning forever. But if we're thinking about incentives, again, we should be mindful of our limitations and be mindful of how the incentives, even if they're monetary incentives, what we provide potentially to node operators, how that compares to other incentives that they might have. And if I'm a malicious node operator, how easy or how hard it is to bribe me, for example, to do something nasty, or like I don't exist in a vacuum as a node operator. I don't just consider, okay, these rewards versus that rewards. I also have the real world around me that also provides me with some like rewards, but also punishments if we are thinking about like governments and laws and court orders to reveal some data. So ideally, I shouldn't be even able to do so. So that was a bit of a, I don't know, maybe I'm not answering the question directly, but that's what comes to mind.
I mean, I think you brought up a couple of the relevant points here. And one is, how do you know that you've got a threat model that you're designing against that actually has a scope of threats that's realistic and has these things that may fall outside of your protocol, like someone being bribed on the side or out of band. It's not part of your protocol, but there's these externalities, and making sure that you've scoped enough of those in ends up being one of the tricks in being able to say, you know, what it actually is that a protocol that gets designed is secure against, because that unknown space is very large, and to feel confident that you've properly characterized that landscape of threats ends up being not necessarily effective or a thing that you're going to feel confident about in approaching it in that framing. And so trying to find ways where you can approach from the other side, where you have a threat model that is more than what a realistic adversary would have. And so clearly a stronger threat level, and then working down often will get you more confidence than starting with the, okay, well, the protocol does this, and then we've got these specific externalities that we're going to try and defend against, like, you know, resistance to bribes or resistance to collusion of this specific form. You really will generally end up with a more confident thing if you approach from a much more powerful adversary, and then carve out exceptions that you need to, but at least clearly qualify and like have a sense of what that is and why you had to carve it out.
Yeah, this is actually so one thing that I think the academic crypto community is doing right. That if you look at, for example, security models for, say, encryption, it's not just can you find the key, can you find the plaintext? It's also if you have an oracle that allows you to do absolutely anything except decrypt this specific plaintext, can you distinguish these two plaintexts? In other words, can you get any information whatsoever? So that kind of model is the kind of thing that we should be designing for, we should be developing for more advanced and more complicated protocols.
Then you said we should be critical. Let's follow this approach in terms of within the cryptography specifically, and within the ZK realm, now FHE realm, there's a sort of buzz around it when many entrepreneurs are using basically cryptography as some sort of VC incentivization or VC mechanism for fundraising, for, let's say, having money for the future product shipment and stuff like that. How you would see this sort of healthier relationship between the cryptography, then implementation itself, let's say on the behind the dev team, and then scalability within the product teams, because sometimes there are gaps. They're not just kind of like developers shipped the whatever cryptographers theorized on or applied cryptographers kind of like made on, but then you need to kind of like product managers, or sort of people who could really bring the audience, if it's to B2B, B2C, or whatever. So how you would state this from critical standpoint, the balance in between cryptography, then the development team, and then the delivery team within the one, whatever it's Electronic Coin Co. or the previous experiences, stuff like that?
I have a conflict of interest here as a direct recipient of a protocol-funded dev fund, so I should not answer this question.
I'm happy to speak here. I think my perspective is that once you get into the relationship where there are products being built on top of cryptographic primitives, in some sense, you can think of that as a win because it is flowing a bunch of money into productionizing and scaling and making that area of research grow and is sort of what we're after, right? Like that is a flowing of capital into additional research to figure out scaling. And so the place where we really need to be figuring out how we invest in what the model is the problems that are still just in theory that we haven't figured out how to productionize or build the protocols on. Because there, it's purely in an academic world, the motivation and incentive is make new papers, figure out some new extension, go to novelty that gets you published, and not to, how does this actually work in a world that's got DDoSes and availability and all these practical nitty-gritty problems that make them potentially productionizable. And so we've got a gap there right after academia that I think Zero Knowledge has recently crossed, but a lot of the others haven't yet. And so that's like a big problem of like, how do we identify and how do we get that even more speculative capital flowing to get these additional cryptographic primitives the attention they deserve.
Yeah, I totally agree with the observation about academia. I mean, there are bonuses to academia. I'm also coming from an academic background, and I very much appreciate the rigorous approach and the formal approach that allows you to precisely state what is being proven or what is being, stated. But on the other hand, the incentives are not aligned very much. And of course, there's no perfect solution, but perhaps a solution that is not perfect but working in the hands of users and actually brings value to the users is better than an ideal paper that's just published and doesn't make any other impact on the world apart from maybe gaining tenure for the person who wrote the paper. So yeah, I mean, what can I say? I would say that for the researchers that kind of cross between these worlds, it's important, or I think it's important for me at least, to kind of not let the product development become too deceptive and become too detached from the scientific foundations, and not of course perhaps we have to take some shortcuts to make it usable for the users because that's what we aim for eventually, but still we have to be mindful of our limitations and be remind ourselves and people around us and our users as well that it's not perfect, and cryptography, even if it's a well-designed algorithm, it's not a silver bullet, and there is lots of implementation details, there's lots of potential attacks, and we cannot do everything perfectly at once, so it's a gradual process.
I realize there is part of this question that I can address because I also have experience in the academic world as a co-author on the Sphinx paper. And to be honest, I find that world very exclusionary. It makes a lot of assumptions about what your incentives are, your access to education, your sort of history of education, your ability to write a certain kind of paper, and often the best protocols don't come from the academic world.
And then now that...
just a short note on that. It's some Twitter that I'm quoting is if Satoshi has submitted the Bitcoin white paper to conference, it wouldn't be accepted.
Yeah, and also right now with lots of challenges within the prosecution of privacy developers, it's interesting that there's an interplay between the applied cryptography and general research, like how we can really tackle those issues, having so complex range of players around. And also it even led to, it's related but kind of like a bit separated to kind of like what decentralization of Ethereum would even mean within recent kind of like many people around questioning the protocol guild role, some sort of non-transparency in terms of tackling the research side, moving forward, who is responsible for what kind of end game scenario we are looking forward, and who should kind of like foster it, and then could this person work at the same time from Eigenlayer and at the same time for Ethereum Foundation or someone around. So the question is basically in this realm, like how you would summarize the key challenges that research is passing through in this environment that I won't call hostile, because if you trace back and you read books like, I don't know, like People's History of United States of America of Howard Zinn, you'll be like, oh, those things existed for many centuries. It's just you were not a part of that specific group who were threatened by some sort of government or other type of adversaries. So what are the key challenges now of R&D in that sense within the privacy realm that's happening here and now?
I would call it hostile, but obviously all of the other things you're referring to are also hostile. I don't really think of attacks on privacy researchers as distinct from attacks on from attacks that are based on people trying to maintain power in general. They're a special case of that. And I mean, the solution is revolution. The solution is to overthrow the current order. It is. That is the solution. And if I was to say anything else, then I would just be bullshitting you.
I guess I could add to that yeah, I mean, thinking about this, like research basically is just a tool. It's just like a scientific method of discovery, or like of trying to figure out whether a certain statement is true, and how we apply it and to which questions we apply it is a question of like either some project leader in some way or some consensus among the founding members of a project or whoever defines the direction, or I mean, yeah, I'm just thinking out loud basically. So coming also from Bitcoin background, in Bitcoin is a special situation where it's not controlled by anyone, and I would say that its development is mostly based on like principles rather than strategy. They have a certain set of like defining fundamental principles, and the scope of potential changes is so narrow within these principles that there is lots of debate, but compared to what happens in other projects that have wild, swings of whether we do this or that, it's quite a narrow band. The Ethereum is kind of different in that regard because it has a leadership, it has Vitalik as a leader, although maybe not like a dictator, but still a person at the helm who defines the direction. And I think it's good to take advantage of the situation, because although it's not as decentralized, quote unquote, it still can be more, like directed towards some aim. And then it's the question of how do we direct the research towards the goal that has some kind of broad community consensus around it. So I'm not sure again if it answers the question really or not.
No, good.
Maybe I should just pass the mic.
I guess the space that is sort of getting called research around, be it Ethereum or within this cryptocurrency space more broadly, is a thing to look at as a job and a deal that is being presented to researchers of like, you get a salary and in exchange you do work in our ecosystem, and is something that you should evaluate as is that going to give you the space to do the work that you find impactful versus academia or any of the other options out there versus running off and you can make your own protocol, you can do your own thing, and set up your own terms and deal for doing that work as well. And right, like we exist in a capitalist society. Like you can play the game. They're going to be giving you as little compensation as they think they can get away with. But that's that game that's getting offered in that space. That may be enough flexibility. It may be more than what you're getting in academia. And I think we see that that's been an effective way to build movements in this space and build some of this transition. But like that's just part of like the trade-off is it is more constrained and directed, and you've got some additional risks. And that's like an evaluation that each person's going to have to make.
Will, remind me, you have, it's written ethical hacker, no? On your X account or on the website. Something like...
Oh, I just write web hacker.
Ah, well, okay.
It doesn't have any meaning.
So ETH Berlin published manifesto. There's kind of like ethical thing, how we should approach the whole hacking, I would say, situation and the decentralization situation. And I never heard ethics behind, let's say, researchers, cryptographers explicitly in terms of kind of like well-written manifesto or like what we stand for, apart from the whole organizations, how they write something like we foster latest cutting edge, blah, blah, blah. How you would state the core ethics that researchers should follow within the privacy realm?
I mean, just try to do things that will help people, and especially marginalized people, and especially create systems that try to disrupt existing systems of power over people. Those are the principles that I follow in general, not just when I'm designing cryptographic protocols. And we have won some huge battles in the past. Just in the crypto realm, we've been winning the crypto wars. We won the right to publish openly cryptographic protocols first. We defeated attempts to force government access to keys, clippership, and so on. We have more recently established HTTPS as the default for well-administered websites. Those are huge victories. We're in the process of normalizing end-to-end encryption for messaging. We can win this battle for financial privacy too.
Will?
I mean, I think I'm personally happy to take a pretty broad view here, which is if you're building something and you've got a threat model and you're building a protocol addressing that threat model, like that is a useful contribution. It doesn't have to be my threat model. Like there's still like having a diversity of protocols, having a diversity of ideas come out there, having new things happen is helping, provide a diversity of options that become useful for others to build on. So in that sense, I think like whether you're directly, solving the problem I have or directly, even if you're not challenging systems of power, if you're building a cryptographic primitive that someone else can build the system around, that's super useful. And so I'm really happy to sort of take this very broad view of, if you're just doing some sort of scam, that's on the other side of that line. But my line is fairly far on the like if you've got some thought model and you're building a system that addresses it, like that's useful.
Yeah, I think we should there are different levels, I guess, in the original question. I mean, when we're talking about some low-level cryptographic research, when you're operating keys and, okay, this adversary has some, I don't know, game, and with this probability it distinguishes between that message and this message, it's quite abstract, and it's difficult for me to come up with a way to explain why this could be unethical. But if we go like into situations where someone, I don't know, works for a dictatorship and develops de-anonymization methods that will be used for political persecution, and it's quite clear that it will be used for that purpose, then it's definitely unethical. And of course, the line is blurry then, and different people have different like political opinions about what constitutes this unethical line. So I don't have the clear answer. Just invite people to think about this. And maybe the last point that I will add is that there is this kind of saying, or maybe an explanation of people who doing arguably unethical things, who say like, if I decline to do that, someone else definitely will, and so it doesn't matter. And that's, I mean, I'm not sure what I think about this line of defense, because cryptography generally is based, or should be based, on the assumption that if we have, I don't know, a private key, the key is private, but everything else can be public, and still the algorithm should be secure. So if we have some like unethical, quote-unquote, work that does some de-anonymization, if de-anonymization is possible, in theory, then it's possible, and someone will discover this. So we'd better discover it sooner and then think about how to defend against it than to be in this unclear situation, then we don't actually know what the text could be. So again, just an invitation to think about this. Don't have the answers, of course.
Yeah, there are different levels at which you can design cryptographic protocols. Even when you're designing something that is quite general purpose, it matters how you describe the model and what assumptions you make. So let's take something like identity-based encryption. It's still quite an abstract primitive, but if you think about the threat model that's sort of inherent in how that's being described when used for its sort of original identity-based purpose, it's completely trusting the key. I forget what it's called, but the key generation authority. Now, that same primitive could also be used for forward secure encryption, for example. In which case, how you're using the same primitive, it changes completely how you think about it. And it matters, as Yingtong was saying earlier, the metaphors we use matter. And so how we describe even the lower level primitives matters. I've forgotten the other point I was going to make.
And then this industry, there's a culture of saying, maybe it's influenced by SEO times, like skip marketing, look for devs and research team. As you kind of like, the more devs, kind of the better, the more researchers, the better. And then once I was working in NIM, I understood that people don't know how to check up if researcher is valid or not. There's a certain lack of, within the general public, go and check academic citations, amount of publishing materials and stuff like that, although Google Scholar and other materials are there. And we were kind of playing around like how to make these numbers accessible or reputable to general public. What would be the way of reintroducing? It's kind of like explain research reputation to 11-year-old, and then you try to break your head and think around like, oh, what could be done there? But I would go the other way around, because people don't talk necessarily about where cryptography or R&D fails. Like, what's the limitation of it? More, it's kind of like easier to say that that's a holy grail, silver bullet, that's the way, we will solve the issues. And then kind of not, or there could be like a big gap between the paper and implementation. So I would want you to mediate on what are the limitations of the research-based field, how you feel them, and maybe what's the real image of the role of cryptography in this industry in that sense.
I'm quite optimistic about the general public's ability to get a correct impression of how trustworthy a given sort of cryptographic system is, because if you think about the 6 degrees of separation idea, I think almost everyone probably has a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who's a cryptographer. And so it is possible to, via so friendship networks, which we shouldn't underestimate, for people to get an accurate idea of, or maybe it isn't even accurate, but it's well motivated. They're trying to get to the truth about how a particular system will or won't protect them. And I don't think we should be unduly negative about that. We should try and do better in terms of explaining our systems. And as I said before, we should try to foster this attitude of skepticism. But it's not an unsolvable problem.
Yeah, like perhaps I'd somewhat disagree. I don't know. Maybe again, like thinking out loud. For me, it sounds like I mean, the scientific papers are written in such a language that is difficult to comprehend for a reason. I mean, it's good when they're written clearly and like the sentences are short and clear and so on, but there is notation, there is like some definitions, and they all exist for a reason. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that for me, it sounds like a little bit unreasonable to expect everyone or even some significant share of the population to like really understand what's happening under the hood. And I don't think it's happening in like other areas of society. Like we don't understand how like medicines work if we're not doctors. We don't understand how even like how cars operate under the hood, although we use it all the time. So for me, I think the priority should be to at least do a better job at explaining to your fellow researchers and developers, and maybe people who are somewhat familiar with the field but not experts in this particular topic, what you're doing and what problem you're solving and what your solution is. So what I've come to realize is that there is, like, even if you don't understand the nitty-gritty details of a particular algorithm, if it's clearly explained, and if, for example, I go on the website of some blockchain-ish project and they have their idea or their key proposition explained in different forms, and they have a paper, they have a blog post, they have a video and a podcast and a poster and whatever, and if everything is kind of harmonized between each other and I have a clear picture of this is the problem, this is roughly what their key idea is, and this is why it works and how it differs from alternatives, that's already, I don't know, a very large step towards establishing your reputation as a good researcher or as a good project that is based on sound research.
Let Will and then go.
I guess I've got a couple comments. I think part of that premise comes from I don't know if it's like compromising on what our definition of researcher is. That term researcher gets used quite a bit as, you know, a marketing term itself. You know, if just because you've hired someone from grad school and then had them build your system doesn't necessarily, you know, mean that that's research, right? So we could have the strict definition of like the research is the stuff that has paper outputs, and then you've got a much clearer, you know, line that you've drawn, and you've got a clearer way to sort of explain, you know, is this, you know, impactful using more traditional academic, you know, I don't know, as flawed as those metrics are, you just go to the same ones, and that works. Or you've just got, you know, a software engineering team. So I think that's maybe
Limitations?
The limitations of a research, like an applied research team. I mean, I think if you take that strict approach of saying the researchers are the ones who are still writing the papers, it's not so different, because I think for the people who are primarily producing either paper output or are, you know, building some model and then writing the papers about it, they've got enough flexibility generally, and there's a competitive landscape right now where if they feel too limited in one place, they can likely either go to academia or somewhere else. I think that if you're getting, you know, published and having impact, that bridge of whether that's happening in an R&D lab, in a crypto company or lab thing versus in academia is pretty undifferentiated, would be my claim.
By the way, you used medicine as an example. It is arguably doing even worse than crypto in terms of explaining and justifying itself to patients. As I know as a trans person, you basically have to take over your own healthcare. And so you see all of the mistakes that doctors make. And it's terrible. It's worse than cryptography.
Here we go. And now reversing to collaboration, because I saw that recently, I think ECC will do an audit of Penumbra. Then Vacu is actively collaborating like with Railgun, and I think there's a sort of feedback loop. Then Will works in incentivization lab, which I guess means working with others and external partners. I would jump into the topic of collaboration. Like, what's the nature? What should be the nature of collaboration between the research teams on the different sites, and how projects focused on privacy could help each other?
I think we need more collaboration, and we need to be more deliberate about it. I mean, the ECC audit of Penumbra just happened by accident. So Henry from Penumbra, Henry de Valence, contacted me about it, and yeah, we just need more of these kinds of collaborations, to make friends with the researchers at the other protocols. That often helps, and without getting too cozy and ending up designing all the same systems, just replicated. Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything else to say about that.
Sergei?
Yeah, definitely collaboration is indeed a good thing, and we should track each other's work, I guess. And again, like maybe a tangential thought, somewhat related, that I think an issue in the industry may be that different teams are working on roughly the same problem and calling the same things by different names. And in academia, sometimes it's also the case, but in general, academia is stricter in terms of defining precisely what we are studying and what the properties are. So I think it's quite helpful, and what industry can learn from academia is this more rigorous approach to definitions. And what helped me a lot are some systematization of knowledge papers where some researchers go into, 20 different white papers and websites, and then they make a big table that like half a page on their paper that says, okay, this project calls this thing by this name and this thing by that name. And now you can compare things, and now some kind of unified picture emerges and allows everyone to learn from everyone else. So I think we should do more of that.
Just comment there. When we were assembling database, there's a hilarious simple thing. It's super hard to find out what project is literally doing for privacy when they're stating state-of-art privacy, the latest development privacy. I'm like, what are you doing exactly? I just need product description. Generally speaking, it's a horror movie, it's a thriller, if we're comparing with the movie genres. And it's hilarious because basically you're spending lots of time just finding out what's that. Well, what's your one use case, for example? How people should or could use you?
I think commercial projects especially are not incentivized to compare themselves with other projects. I argued from the start that Zcash should write a comparison of itself with Monero. It would have been controversial, but people don't have a clear idea of what the trade-offs are between the different approaches we take to privacy. And it was just considered too toxic to touch, really. Yeah.
I guess, so there's a couple things that probably I want to say on this point. One is we have already some forms of collaboration here. So an example would be Universal Privacy Alliance. a fair number of privacy-focused protocols have an industry alliance. Like there's a legal Swiss entity that can act as a joint advocacy organization for them. And so I think there's some things of that nature that help us have some of these collaborative unified voices. The other side, purely as you get into research, is that I think a lot of the conferences and places where people are presenting papers end up being fairly neutral against corporates. So like maybe not a DevCon or a DAppCon or something like that. But if we look at things like real world crypto or PETS will be in the UK in July. These are privacy enhancing technology symposium. These are larger gatherings of both academia and industry research that are places where the researchers can come together in pretty neutral settings and trade ideas, and I think that's working reasonably well.
Yeah, just to the point of conference, I would also recommend people who want to know more about this intersection of academic and industrial research to look at Financial Cryptography, FC conference, and Advances in Financial Technologies, or AFT, which are also one of the major avenues for publishing research in our general area.
And to wrap things up, I'm interested what kind of papers or the projects, not of your own, you're looking forward to kind of like be implemented or delivered, or you just read them this year, like as something fresh that interests you as researchers, as cryptographers, as hackers, within the, again, privacy realm. And maybe something fresh in that sense. So we will have a snapshot of right now, so people can go explore, and that will kind of like, that will be an incentivization because it's called curiosity.
Binius, which is sort of a category of proof systems using towers of binary fields. And I think that has the potential to sort of bridge the gap between what has previously been efficient in circuits and what is efficient so for general computation.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult, to be honest, to like pinpoint something in particular. I would say that, again, like listened to a few talks on the DAppCon earlier today, and again, it's not maybe directly related, although again, tangentially related to what Waco is doing specifically, but I've heard lots of talks about like more financial applications and DeFi stuff and roll-ups and related things. I think that oftentimes people kind of put privacy on the back burner, I would say, for the sake of efficiency, whatever you define it, like especially financial efficiency. And people talk a lot about which tokens gain yields here and there and how you can lock tokens for more tokens. But who tracks all these things? Like how private are you while you're doing this? Who knows? Probably you're not very private. So this, I think, is some area of research that requires more attention, in my opinion. And maybe projects like Waco could be useful for communication layer, for privacy-focused, interactions between different actors in this ecosystem. But I don't think it will be sufficient. We should think more about privacy from different angles in financial applications and others as well.
One that seems to be continuing to advance fairly quickly, that's got some interesting things you can do with it, is time lock constructions. So how do you have things that are encrypted such that at some future point in time they will become able to be visible by either globally or at least some parties. And so with that sort of construction, depending on your efficiencies and like, can you have everything get encrypted against a single key so that there's one decryption? So you've got a bunch of efficiency things at this point. It's a systems problem, but it gives you a way to sort of get around a bunch of weird constructions that have popped up in Ethereum and elsewhere.
Actually, one more. Do you ever iterate, talk or sit and talk with legal side? Because it's interesting that a total different spectrum. Although I know that in Filecoin there's a big team doing lobbying, many others. Even I saw once GR manager on the Filecoin Foundation. I'm like, oh, that's the real deal. Have you ever, like, what's the nature of iteration between this legal side of yours? Not necessarily in organization, but in general within the market. Is there connectivity between those two realms?
I mean, we do have people working on regulatory outreach at ECC, fewer than before because we have less money. And we do talk to them. But I mean, that doesn't directly influence protocol design. So, yeah. I don't think it should. I think that we have to build the most private systems we know how to build. And I'm not here to compromise on that, even if there is a lot of regulatory pushback.
Yeah, so I don't actually have much of a comment. I mean, these types of things haven't affected my work personally that much, or at all, to be honest. But like some kind of a canary warning here. So probably no further comment.
I think there are like tech policy labs or entities that will generally output white papers that help sort of lay out what shapes of technical systems are going to be effective in a regulatory landscape. So, you know, you should expect that the regulation is going to think of money as it crosses borders as happening in this way, and so a system would need to do X or Y in order to be seen in this regulatory light. Like, is the sorts of white papers that you see come out of these tech policy labs that are sort of at that intersection between, you know, trying to interpret some of the technical systems and then what that legal perspective is going to take. So I think that's like a one form of that feedback loop that happens. I think the other one is you get requirements or risk mitigation requests from legal, and then you try and iterate back and forth on like, well, what solves that? Okay, you need to, you know, make sure that you're doing your KYC. How does that work with a smart contract? There's no customer. So it gives you some interesting places to start designs.
I said that it hadn't affected protocol design, but it does affect the our ideas of what services we run versus sort of outsourcing to other people or letting the community run, because there is a lot of centralization risk with the protocol developers being the same entity that runs sort of nodes or sort of facilitates transfers. And we saw that with Tornado Cash, for example. We are very consciously trying to separate protocol design from running infrastructure.
Oh, one more. But that's a good one. It's not a technical advice right now, disclaimer. How you would do Tornado Cash differently? It's not a technical advice, but how you would approach Tornado Cash differently?
Tornado Cash is a mixer. I don't think mixers provide adequate privacy. You need to hide the whole transaction graph. So that, I guess that doesn't answer the question. I would not be involved in that project anyway, because I don't think it provides adequate privacy.
I think we should learn from Satoshi Nakamoto.
That's a great wrap of today's evening. Thanks, Daira-Emma. Thanks, Sergei. Thanks, Will. Yeah, thank you. I will do small closing remarks, but just to be quick, I want to thank everyone involved today, especially the Seabase crew, Sven doing the streaming, Lichi hosting us, many other people voting, deciding that it will be okay to have us here. All the speakers, all the contributors, there were many people behind the thingy. All the friends, I guess, I'm not sure, I'm lost in those files. Everyone who said yes when we outreach, everyone who said also no for any reason, and also that's cool to have diversity. Lots of contributors who came here today. And I hope that whatever we do will help you to smile like Jaya, or to drink a beer like Max, or to be like Ying Tong that said Daira-Emma would join the show today, or Timofey who asked about his colleagues to get in. It's about human connectivity, and we do things not for ourselves, but for others too. And I wish, I'm really happy that you heard the Blockchain Socialist song. That's epic. Thanks a lot. Let's wrap up for today. And we socialize. No one is throwing you out. You can talk.